Now, you aim at something, you've got a goal, and then you see that you're making progress towards the goal. That's a good thing. That makes you happy. It actually, technically, there's a system, dopamine system, neurochemical system. Same system, by the way, that cocaine and methamphetamine and opiates activate, which is why people like to take those drugs. And it tells you that you're moving forward in the manner that you should be according to the dictates of your plan. Doesn't necessarily tell you whether you have a good plan. That's a more complicated problem, because who knows if you have a good plan. But one thing that you could know is that a plan is better than no plan. That's a really useful thing to know, especially if you're kind of drifting. It's like, well, I'm going to find myself. It's like, no, just pick something and move towards it. And as you move towards it, you're going to succeed and fail specifically. And then you're going to learn something about success specifically, and you're going to learn something about failure specifically. And then you can learn what you use to fix your plan. So a stupid plan is way better than no plan. And you're likely to have a stupid plan, or at least to be able to make one. So that's good news for everybody. You can make a stupid plan. And so I would say, make a stupid plan. And then implement it. Not any stupider than it has to be. You know, you could think about it a little bit, but then implement it. And have your successes and failures along the way, and learn from them. And then you can rejig the goal. You can move the target. That's fine. That's part of the game. It doesn't have to be fixed. It's a movable target. And maybe what you're trying to do is to move the target to an ever better place. So you're moving towards a target, and at the same time you're moving the target. Right. And you're trying to move the target towards something like an ultimate ideal. You're trying to find out what that ultimate ideal is. And part of the way you figure that out is by moving towards a target and by learning about success and failure along the way, because then you can inform yourself with regards to what might constitute a reasonable aim. And so that's the reason to go out in the world and make some mistakes, you know? And then you're going to. And so it's okay. It's okay to make the mistakes. It's not so okay not to learn from them, because then you make the mistakes again. That seems pointless. And so you're moving towards wherever you're going, and it's working. And so you get some positive emotion. You get some motivation from this dopaminergic system that adds zest to life. It adds interest and engagement and meaning to life. It pulls you into life. And that's worth thinking about, I would say, because if you think about it, you know, might wonder about whether or not you should be engaged in life. And then if all of a sudden you're doing something, and because you're doing it, you get engaged in life, then it seems like that might be the very definition of a good thing. It's evidence. The engagement is evidence that you're actually doing a good thing, a worthwhile thing in life with all its suffering and misery and brutality. It's like you've got a pathway, you've got an aim, you're moving forward, you're engaged. Excellent. Your nervous system, very deep down, this dopaminergic system, it's associated with a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. It's a really, really old part of the brain. It's not some new thing that popped up like 15,000 years ago. It's ancient. It's there to orient you in the world. It's part of the instinct for meaning that I talked about in chapter 7. Do what is meaningful and not what is expedient. It's a deep, deep instinct. And way down in your psychophysiological structure, not as far down as the serotonin system, but like next level up. And so if it's saying, hey man, you're on the right track, it's like, that's worth noticing. It's worth noticing. Now you can criticize it out of existence. You can question your aim continually. It's one of the, what would you call it, dangers of our capacity to abstract. But you know, if you're a smart person who doubts, you also might be smart enough now and then to doubt your doubt, and just to notice and to pay attention. And it's something I explain to my clinical clients and my students often. It's like, if you're trying to put your life together, watch yourself for a couple of weeks. Like you don't know who you are. Because if your life isn't together, you don't know who you are. So just watch yourself like you don't know who you are. And notice now and then if you're engaged in something. You know, and you kind of have to wake up, because if you're engaged in it, you don't quite notice, right? Because you're engaged in it. But afterwards, you might think, oh, I just spent an hour, and I didn't notice that it was an hour. I was in it. That's good. You're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. There's something about that that's right. And maybe like you're not in good shape and that happened to you like 15 minutes once in 2 weeks. It's like, that's pretty dismal. And the rest of the time it was wretched. It's like, okay, fine. Well, maybe in the next 2 weeks you see if you can do it for half an hour. And then maybe for 45 minutes. And then maybe for an hour, right? You can start practicing being in that place. That's a very useful thing to learn. It's like, oh, look, I'm interested in what I'm doing. I'm engaged in it. Now, how did I get here? Where am I exactly? And how did I get here? And how could I stay here? How could I be here more often? Those are all questions you have to ask yourself. Well, that's the beginning of philosophy as well. And you think, well, why bother? And the answer is, well, you want to be engaged in your life? Well, why would you? Well, it's positive. It's analgesic. It fights off pain. Quells anxiety. It gives you purpose. It's good for you, practically speaking. Generally speaking, if you have an aim and you're moving forward to something that's psychologically valuable, but also practically valuable. If it's really a good aim, also it's good for you now, tomorrow, the next day, the next month, because you're generally smart enough to calibrate yourself so that things that are really bad for you don't have that engaging quality. Now, it's not perfect, especially if you've messed yourself up psychologically by lying to yourself in all sorts of different ways. But it's still not a bad orienting system. And then the other thing you can also notice is, well, when are you doing things that make you feel really awful? By your own standards. It's like, oh, look, I just did something, had some interaction with someone, and now I feel awful. It's like, well, maybe you could not do that, whatever it was. You might have to think it through. What were the routines that constituted that ill-advised set of actions? And maybe you're going to have to think really deeply about it, because God only knows how much of your personality structure is involved in that error. But if it made you wretched, it made you feel like life wasn't worth living, then that might be a hint that that wasn't a good thing to do. And so then maybe you could start doing more of the things that make you engaged and less of the things that make you hate life. And that's worthy of practice, let's say. You might think about that as it's a fundamental ethical requirement, or I would say it's a fundamental form of religious meditation. That's a better way of thinking about it. And so then you're on the path. That's the straight and narrow path. It's like, I'm moving forward. I've got an aim. I'm moving forward. As I move forward, I'm engaged. It's bloody well worth walking down this pathway. And, on the left of me is terror and horror and hell and pain, and I'm avoiding that. And to the right of me, perhaps, is ego and arrogance and the things that can get out of control with regards to positive emotion. But I've got that balance right. I'm on the right pathway. Okay, and now we think about what might constitute the right pathway. Well, I can tell you a pathway that works for me to some degree. So this is a value structure that's characteristic of me, of things I do. I type because I write, and so that's pure action, right? I type letters, I type words, I type phrases, I type sentences, I type paragraphs, I type chapters, I write books, and then I talk about the books, and people read the books. And the reason that they can understand the books is because we're a lot the same. There's a lot of things that have to be the same about you and me before I can write a book that you can read. And I have to be able to take them for granted. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because there's an important relationship between my hierarchy of values and your hierarchy of values if we're going to be able to communicate and if we're going to be able to occupy the same place at the same time. So if I'm writing a book like 12 Rules for Life and it has a discussion about what constitutes the good in it, then I have to start with the presupposition that we share some fundamental intuition about what constitutes the good, or my words will fall on deaf ears. Okay, and it's partly because, and this is maybe the relationship between the social world and the psychological world that I wanted to talk about. As I build up my hierarchy of skill and ability, perception and emotional regulation, from slicing carrots upwards, I'm a good cook, I'm a good parent, maybe I'm a good man, maybe I'm a good person, and all of those cover a broader and broader range of abstractions and abilities. There has to be a relationship between that and what other people think. You know, because look, if your kid, you teach your kid to set the table, and then he goes to someone else's house and sets the table, and he gets a swat. It's like, well, what's the consequence of that? Well, the consequence of that is that the kid is going to be unhappy. Well, why? Well, it's because the kid did a lot of work building up all those separate skills to undertake that complex activity. And it really is a complex activity. You don't have a robot at home that sets the table. You know, you have a cell phone and it's smart, but it can't set the damn table. It's complicated to do that sort of thing. And so your kid had built this complicated neurological structure as a consequence of reward, primarily, because reward helps build neurological structures. Built this whole structure, and now what he's hoping is that all the work that went into building that structure is something that other people will appreciate as well. So that's where you need the isomorphism between the intrapsychic structure, the psychological structure, and the social structure, which is why we have to have a shared social reality. This is partly why I think the so badly with their insistence that the world was only language. It's like, it is in some sense very important that you construe the world the same way I do, even though there's a very wide range of ways of construing the world. We come to some negotiated agreement about what's good and what isn't, so that when